It could be. We're certainly dangerously close, and we'll have to watch it carefully. But just for the benefit of the viewers, maybe I'll just take just a minute and explain what Ice 9 is. It's an idea that I nicked from Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote a novel in the 1960s called Cat's Cradle, which I highly recommend. A little bit of dark, we call it dark humor, dark comedy. But in Cat's Cradle, there was a physicist who created an isotope of water called Ice 9. It had the following properties. It was frozen at room temperature, but if a molecule of Ice 9 came in contact with a molecule of water, the water turned to ice. And you had a small vial, and if you poured it into a stream, let's say, the stream would turn to ice, but then through contact, so would the rivers, and then the oceans, and then all the water on Earth, and then life on Earth would die. So it was a doomsday machine. Of course, this was written during the height of the Cold War, when we were all worried about nuclear war. So what I did, I took that concept and brought it over to capital markets. And I made the point that you can close a particular venue if you have disorderly trading. So let's say the stock market's crashing, the circuit breakers don't work, and they decide to close the stock market. Well, they can do that, but it doesn't alleviate the demand for liquidity. People will simply go over to the money market and say, well, fine, I'm redeeming my money market funds. So then you have to shut the money market funds, and then it goes over to the banking system, and people queue up at the banks and try to take all the money out of the banks, and then you have to shut the banks and so forth. In other words, there's a kind of financial contagion to go along with our viral contagion that we're facing now, where every time you close something, the pressure goes to another venue, and then it has to be closed. And eventually you end up shutting down all the markets, banks, stock exchanges, et cetera, in the world, at least temporarily, until you come up with some kind of solution. So that was the idea. It's interesting to see that Ice 9 has now become part of I would say standard financial jargon. I see it all the time. They don't credit me, let alone Kurt Vonnegut, who came up with it. But that's okay. It's useful. It's more than a metaphor. Actually, the math is the same, and it has become parlance. So, my book, The Road to Ruin, from 2016, described this phenomenon. My latest book, Aftermath, came out last year, but this book, The Road to Ruin, interestingly, like any author, I check the Amazon rankings every now and then. The Road to Ruin is selling even faster than some of my other books, even though it's a few years old, because it does have this explanation of Ice 9, which we just talked about. And then people say, well, that will never happen. And I remind them, no, the New York Stock Exchange was closed for 5 months from August 1914 to December 1914, at the beginning of World War I. In 1933, our President Franklin Roosevelt closed all the banks in the United States by executive order, all of them. He didn't say when they would reopen. In fact, they reopened about 8 days later, but no one knew that at the time. They used the euphemism, the banking holiday. Well, it wasn't a holiday. They were closed by orders. In 2013, all the banks in Cyprus were closed. In 2015, all the banks in Greece were closed. People in Athens were flying to Frankfurt with empty suitcases, filling them up with physical paper euro notes, and flying back to Athens because the banks were closed, the ATMs were shut down, the credit cards didn't work, etc. And so all these things have happened before. They happen under duress, under stress, but the idea that, that would never happen is not true. And then all I've done is take that a step further and say, yeah, and it can be worse than that because they can be kind of closed down sequentially, at least until monetary authorities come up with a solution. So we're seeing the very early stages of that. We've seen a couple of trading halts on the New York Stock Exchange. That's not the same as shutting the exchange, but we hit these circuit breakers. The floor of the stock exchange is closed now. I think most people know that 95% or more of the trading is robotic. So, the computers are doing fine, but the floor of the New York Stock Exchange right now is closed. I went to a bank the other day. It was closed. Now there were other offices elsewhere. I can do online banking, but the banks are closed, not by government order, but just because of the virus. So we're seeing it happen in certain ways. And I think people who assume it can't happen take too much for granted.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And just to take it a step further, this is not, well, I'll speak specifically about the United States and Europe, but I have good reason to believe similar things are happening in Australia. This is not a recession. This is a depression. So you can look at 2008. You can look at 2000 in the U.S. when we had the dot-com crash. You can look at 1998 with the long-term capital management in Russia. You can look at 1994 with the tequila crisis in Mexico. None of those financial panics or drawdowns really are the proper baseline for understanding what's going on now. You have to go back to 1929. You have to go back to the Depression and the Great Depression. And I remind people that in the Great Depression, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, our main stock market index, fell 89%. Not 30% or 40% or 50%, but almost 90%. It was exactly 89.2%. That's what a depression looks like. That's what a real bear market looks like. So our stocks are down 30%. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot of lost wealth. It's a shock to most people. I've heard of people getting their, we have these 401k plans, tax deferred savings plans, like a little personal superannuation fund. And people are getting their monthly statements in the mail and they're just putting them in the trash. They're afraid to look at them. But that's pretty bad. But that's nothing compared to what happened in 1929. So down 30%. Okay, that's bad enough. But imagine down 40%, 50%, 60% or more. That's what we're looking at potentially. This is one of the questions I'm asked most frequently lately is, is the bottom in? Is this a safe time to, kind of go back in the water and buy stocks? And my answer is absolutely not. I mean, yeah, you'll have a couple good days or little 3-day rallies here and there, but the bottom's not in. This is just the first wave of repricing by the stock market with much more to go. I'm not sure of the status of the Perth Mint, but I believe they are backordered. I know the U.S. Mint is backordered for the rest of the year. So they're still producing gold coins, but they're all spoken for. If you have a new order, they won't return your call. So it's, and people would say, well, Jim, why don't you, if you wouldn't mind, call me the day before the crisis hits and I'll sell my stocks and buy some gold. And my answer was, first of all, I won't know the exact day. I'll tell you what's going to happen, the order of magnitude. I won't know the exact day. If I did, I might be a little busy myself. But the real point is, what are you waiting for? When the crisis comes, it's already too late. The market has gapped down. The gold's not available. The time to get it is when things were still relatively calm. But it's not too late. Because gold is going to go much higher and stocks are going to go much lower. And even though we've had some of that adjustment, it's not by any means done. So yeah, leaning forward a little bit and seeing what's going to come next. Unfortunately, these complex systems have a way of crashing into each other. My example is always March 2011, the Fukushima disaster in Japan. You had an earthquake that turned into a tsunami, that turned into a nuclear meltdown at a power plant, that turned into a stock market crash. So you had 4 separate systems, seismology, hydrology, radioactivity, and capital markets, normally independent.